Now that you've heard about the Enchanted Forest, let's get on to its bigger, more popular amusement park in Rhode Island, Rocky Point. Rocky Point didn't always start out as an amusement park. It was originally started in the 1840s by Captain William Winslow as a place where he just took passengers on his boat for good Sunday outings. By 1847, Winslow had actually purchased the land he was landing people on and started creating amusements there and built it as fun under the trees. In 1850, Winslow upped his game by now adding the first carousel, swings, and the precursor to the Ferris wheel called the Spanish Fandango. In the 1860s, Winslow broadened his horizons by adding the Forest Casino, which held gambling, politicians, and boxing matches for customers to see. On September 6, 1903, the Boston Bean Eaters actually played the Philadelphia Phillies at Rocky Point due to blue laws not allowing them to play at their normal play area. At around the turn of the century, a man named Colonel Harrington took over from William Winslow and started billing Rocky Point as one of the most beautiful parks ever. At this point, the park had upgraded to a actual Ferris wheel, a flume-like ride, and a few other more attractions, beefing it up to more of an actual amusement park due to the closer rail lines providing easier access to this point for patrons. In 1936, the large saltwater swimming pool, which is now filled in, actually held tryouts for the 1936 Summer Olympics, which I think is pretty interesting. Two hurricanes would actually wreak havoc on the park, though they would rebuild. The hurricane in 1938 actually destroyed the flume ride, which was there, but it was eventually rebuilt. The other hurricane, Hurricane Carol, in 1954, caused minor damage, but nothing noteworthy. In 1949, Rocky Point was actually purchased by its final official owners, the Polera family, two brothers, one of them being named Conrad, who had already worked at the park as a general manager since it had become a fixture of his childhood, and he would ride there on his motorbike almost daily. By the 1950s, Rocky Point had become Rhode Island's most visited attraction, with great food at the diner, which was like steamed clams, lobster, clam chowder, and then great performances at the lounge and the Palladium that was built there in the late 1950s. At the height of its popularity, the rides were featured was the corkscrew roller coaster, a Skyliner ride, a free fall ride which fell 13 stories at 55 miles an hour, a House of Horrors, and a large dining hall, as well as the previously mentioned Palladium, where many actually big music stars performed at the Palladium over 30 years before its closure in 1994, such as REO Speedwagon, AC/DC, Janis Joplin, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and my personal favorite, Weird Al Yankovic, actually performed there in the 1990s. Unfortunately, by the mid-90s, the park was in great decline, as other amusement parks in the area, such as Six Flags Connecticut and Lake Compounce, were bigger and had constantly upgrading and changing their rides to bring in new people, as well as the area becoming more affluent, and other huge parks in other parts of the country, like Disney, taking patrons from their area and moving them down to Florida or to California or anywhere else. The park actually closed its doors finally in 1994. It was reopened in 1996 for a very short period as a farewell to fans and a final hurrah and goodbye, as that same year, most of its attractions and rides were actually sold off, some as far away as Washington State. After its closure, the land became unused, and the buildings fell into disrepair. In 2000, the Dodgem House actually caught fire and damaged many of the other buildings around it in the park, which caused the mayor of Warwick to call for the demolition of the rest of the park. In 2003, All the land which Rocky Point stood on was purchased for about $8.5 million. On September 6th of the next year, a mysterious fire broke out in the Big House, one of the main buildings that was still left standing. This one was suspected to be arson, as there was no electrical running through that building, which could have caused the fire. Another fire was actually started in 2006, this time one of the executive buildings. It was quite large, and smoke could be seen billowing up to 2,000 feet away. Good thing is that nobody was harmed in either of these fires, though it did quicken the pace for the demolition of the area. This led to, on May 7th of 2007, the rest of the park finally actually undergoing demolition, with all of the main buildings being fully demolished and leveled into the ground. The people who bought the land for $8.5 million in 2003, the Small Business Association, actually was hearing bids from investors to turn the land into a gated community, which is not what the people of Warwick would have wanted. And they voiced their opinions and actually did something about it. In 2008, the city of Warwick was actually able to secure a federal grant which allowed them to purchase 82 acres of the land, including almost all of the beachfront property. In 2012, the U.S. Small Business Association finally begrudgingly accepted the town's offer and sold it to them so they may turn it into a state park. In 2013, the remaining acres were finally sold to the state of Rhode Island, who now owns the whole land which once was Rocky Point, which they'll be keeping updated and maintained as it will not fall into more disrepair. On June 26, 2011, the park actually was finally reopened for guests. This included a mile-long walking trail along the Narragansett Bay, which provided great views of the bay, as well as most of the area turned into a large field for picnics, throwing and playing catch, or just leisure walks, as you may walk around and see pieces of what once was there. Some notable things do still remain at the park, even though none of it is now in use, besides for just leisure walking, as said previously. It is the front and the back of the gondola skyline ride, which would take patrons high above Rocky Point and be able to give them aerial views of all of the attractions they'd be going to, which is actually quite interesting. The only other notable remaining piece of what once was there is the arch, which is quite noticeable as it was used in the 1964 World's Fair. Then it was transported here in 3 parts and built, where now it still stands as a testament to time. I hope you all enjoyed learning about Rocky Point, which once was the premier amusement park of Rhode Island. Hope you guys would like to tune in next week when we might get some psychiatric help at the Medfield State Hospital.